So why don't we start with these non-crime hate incidents, as they're called. A couple more examples in the papers this morning. We don't know all the details of these, so they may sound more ridiculous than they really were. But nevertheless, on the face of it, a woman compared to a Rottweiler said that she was subjected to racist abuse and complained to police.
She was German, wasn't she?
She was
That's
German,
why she
so I guess it's a German breed of dog, traditionally. A person in South Yorkshire said they were the victim of homophobic abuse in a row over a privet hedge when a neighbour called him a Leonard. And we were saying earlier, we don't really get that one.
I've never heard that.
I've never heard that.
As a gay man, I've never been called a Leonard before.
Haven't you?
I don't know if that's...
No.
I mean, text in if you understand what the reference is.
Well, if you do now, it's a hate crime.
I can go to the police.
Yeah.
And then just want to do this one last as well. A man was investigated for racial hatred for whistling Bob the Builder tune at his neighbour. I don't get that one either. Is it just a typically English thing, maybe? I don't know. Do you worry that we are sort of making a mockery of real hate crime here by reporting these things to the police and expecting them to investigate them?
Yeah, it is worrying. I mean, isn't it? I mean, it's, you know, the time should be taken up because every time someone logs a call like that or rings up, that will take some time. There will be paperwork involved and everything else. And I think it does sort of, if you like, in some ways disrespect what I would consider real hate crime to be and the consequences of it. So, yes, we've got to get a grip on some of this because it's ridiculous. I mean, it's a bit like sometimes, you know, you hear about people ringing 999 when it's not an emergency or people putting in ridiculous insurance claims. You know, I was driving down the street and suddenly a car appeared out of nowhere and, you know, I went into it. All these things where it becomes ridiculous makes a mockery of what the intent was. And the intent for this was to deal with really sort of pernicious sort of name-call insults and not just insults, the viciousness behind that behaviour. And that's not good.
So the haircut we're talking about, and as we say, we're only going on the details we've got. The reason why it was lodged complaint as a hate crime was because the person having the haircut spoke Russian, the person doing the haircut, the hairdresser, was Ukrainian, and the customer said he was very rough with me, nothing actually wrong with the haircut, but he was very rough with me and abusive because an argument had broken out. So is it one of those things that, you know, the actual incident doesn't seem serious, but what's underneath it is?
Look, that might well be the case. And, you know, as you started off with, we don't know what the specific details are. I think, for me, there is a whole piece about, you know, how is this legislation covered, how are different police forces enforcing it. But there is also the human element. At what point do you decide that you've had some kind of disagreement with somebody and you think that that justifies a police call? And I think it's very hard to draw that line and that distinction because you might feel upset by something. You know, it might be something that you go home and talk through with your friend. But at what point do you decide that this is something that does require police time? And at what point does the police say, yes, we're going to engage with this?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're in sort of uncharted waters in some ways, because there isn't a standard, and police, if they don't report it and it is something big, are in trouble. If they do report it when, you know, crime isn't getting investigated elsewhere, are in trouble. And it reminds me a little bit about how 30, 40 years ago, police would say, oh, it's just a domestic.
Yeah.
And actually now we don't think it's just a domestic. So, but on the face of it, this looks unnecessary, doesn't it?
But it's a question of monitoring as well. So if we are just talking about the fact that this is monitoring and trying to help police identify patterns, then that is something that is interesting. But, you know, police chiefs also need to come forward and say, how are they actually using it, how much time this uses, and how are they balancing that? I think quite often we go for kind of like the sledgehammer to crack a nut approach, which is, my God, we need the Home Secretary involved to kind of like legislate a way for this or change the laws around it. But actually, what we need is that step in between it and say to police forces, actually, do you find this helpful? Tell us how that monitoring may have helped and how it has prevented crime further downstream. But when you hear stories about, you know, last time we were talking 9-year-olds being reported for name-calling in schools, it does sort of make the blood boil.
And also, you know, how much is some of it just antisocial behaviour rather than necessarily hate crime? You know, like the guy whistling the Bob the Builder theme tune. I mean, if that happened every morning at 6 a.m. outside your front door, you probably would find it quite annoying and you would want the police to do something about it and shut him up. But the government is saying today it's going to crack down on antisocial behaviour, more respect orders that they're going to bring in, sounds a bit like ASBOs from the 1990s, Caroline. You'll remember the government bringing in those, and they were scrapped.
Part of that government bringing those.
And then the coalition government, wasn't it, that scrapped them because they didn't really work. So how do you feel about this sort of retro throwback, bringing back respect orders?
Well, I think, you know, everything is about context, but one of the things about antisocial behaviour, and when we did introduce the original sort of ASBOs, was because actually people were reporting things happening in their neighbourhood and the police weren't recording it. And so, as an MP, when I would, on behalf of constituents, say, look, I'm hearing all these things about some really difficult, really horrible antisocial behaviour, intimidation, not there's graffiti and it takes many forms, but this was intimidation happening on people's doorsteps. They would say, we don't know about it, because it wasn't being recorded. And actually, when they did start recording, they realised that this wasn't just a one-off. This was a few individuals, often adults, I have to say, not necessarily young people, who were undertaking a behaviour that was really undermining people's confidence.
And that grinds people down as well, doesn't it? It sounds low level, but if it's happening every single day, someone kicking a ball against your window or shouting late at night or drunk outside your front door.
Or dropping rubbish in your front garden,
that is the kind of stuff that can make your life hell, actually.
Demoralising.
Yeah, but the question here is, if you have respect orders, we understand why ASBOs were brought in, but then at some point they became a badge of honour for certain people as well.
I remember
that.
And so,
but don't you remember when the sort of mug shots were put in the paper as an attempt to shame those that have received them, and for some hardened individuals, one assumes, rather than those that could be turned around, it did become a badge of honour.
That didn't happen everywhere, though. Not every police force got engaged in that sort of thing, Kate.
Really?
And I think the thing about the ASBOs, first of all, they were happening because actually the police, not just the police, actually working with the local authority for where you had cars being dumped and set fire to by others and things like this. People in the community felt, they're listening. They understand what is going on. And some of those people, adults, not just young people, were then going into other forms of crime as well. Now, it's not the only tool in the box, but actually I regret that the coalition government stood away from that.
That's interesting, because the figures show that actually 2/3 of the ASBOs given out were breached more than once. Labour never reached its target of reducing reoffending. But you're saying that there's an impact on the people in the community, even if it doesn't necessarily stop some of the offences.
But that's why it's not the only tool in the box. You're right. I mean, one of the things that undermined it was people breaching them. But let's be honest, we put people in prison and then they come out and reoffend as well again. So there's got to be other things going on. Why are these people getting involved in this? But do you know what? In communities, I think back to, my time as an MP, certainly in Doncaster, I'm talking about some of the poorest neighbourhoods, not the affluent neighbourhoods. They felt people were listening and they felt protected. But also, what we also had was police in those communities. And those teams that worked in the communities with people from the local authority as well were making a difference. And then, we know 20,000 police officers were got rid of under the coalition government, and that put a strain on providing that service in communities to those neighbourhoods who were suffering the most.
But at the time, violent crime was coming down, serious crime was coming down, and when you had the period of austerity, actually shrinking the state and responding to what was actually happening made sense. Now, when violent crime started rising again, actually, strangely, it was under Boris Johnson's tenure that you had 20,000 being recruited.
To replace the 20,000 that went.
Hasn't been... Yeah, but it's not... I think that's too simplistic. If you're defining it that way and you've got crime and the changing nature of crime...
I'm saying if you take 20,000 police officers off the streets and in communities, and then, a few years down you try backfilling, all the work that's done within those communities, the confidence they build up is absolutely
but you're not trying
demolished.
To backfill, because actually there are changes in crime, there's changing in reporting, there's changes in specialism.
I was a Home Office minister. I did organised crime, I know.
Yeah, I know. Well, I was a Home Office special advisor, so we've both got very similar experiences on the policy area. But the point is that you have a difficult situation. In domestic violence, for example, it requires a different kind of specialism. So actually, there's been a load of work on training, College of Policing, recruitment in different expertise with policing.
I know.
And so I think this retread of ASBOs...
But it still takes 2 years for a case to come to court if you're raped.
But that's a criminal justice system. It's not a Home Office thing.
It's a part...
So if you're talking about bringing back or having respect orders that's bringing back ASBOs, there is a sense, yes, in the community that you feel like something's being done. But if the outcomes aren't changing,
does that
Salma, actually work?
Of course, policing and community safety is multifaceted. I covered organised crime, so I was dealing with, you know, some of the most horrible criminal gangs in this country, and they are criminal entrepreneurs that still exist. But the truth is, you've got to build confidence from the bottom up. And in those communities, actually work was being done to join the dots. And if you take away the resource, then you can't deal with these multifaceted things. The truth is, if you've got good cops working with others, experts in the community, then you're much better to be able to deal with things like domestic violence and other forms of crimes that are happening in people's homes, in their neighbourhoods. But if you take away such an important element of that, everything else is going to be a problem. And crime has been generally going down for years. Every government, Labour or Tory, will say, but crime is going down. But when you're in a neighbourhood facing, you know, harassment and intimidation every day, you don't feel it. You don't feel it.
And town centres, which is one of the things that these are really designed, these new respect orders are designed to tackle. Town centres now have become sort of no-go zones. I know that's something the Home Secretary feels very strongly about. And Salma, you know, it is a fact that shoplifting is absolutely soared.
It's right.
And that is the kind of thing that Bobbies on the Beat used to tackle. And so if you take police officers out of the system, it's no wonder that those kind of crimes go up.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that that's directly linked to neighbourhood policing and community policing, because this is about serious organised crime, because this is not like people going in and just shoplifting one thing off the shelf. This is about people going in and taking huge amounts off the shelf.
But don't they recruit from the community to organise those gangs?
If you look at an organised crime group, they've got their people on the ground doing that to order, and you need the police there to find out, and they're often people from those neighbourhoods. They know who they are. In Doncaster, they've known where... there's an incident in Doncaster where there was a shoplifting offence, and they knew who it was, and they were able to go round and knock on that person's door and call him out.
Salma?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in those incidents, there is better data, and it is about the way that police are working in the community. But this is about tackling organised crime, and that requires a different kind of specialism. I also think that as far as, you know, retail crime goes, there are really great things that are happening in terms of biometrics, in terms of videos, that are happening in the private sector as well, that should be there to help support the police in order to do that better. But there's just one other point I want to make on town centres. There is another part of government policy that actually should be helping to feed into this, and that is about economic growth
business rates
and all that other stuff that is occurring that has driven down the sort of and created the plight of the town centre, in that it's not the place that people go to shop anymore, and it has become very deprived. So I think that has given over to crime. OK, well, we've got some big world events going on as well to discuss this morning, not least of all the Ukraine-Russia conflict, of course. I mean, it's pretty terrifying, isn't it, that Vladimir Putin is saying overnight that he is quite happy to fire these new intercontinental missiles at Western targets, US targets, potentially in Poland, for example. I mean, this feels like another escalation this morning, doesn't it? I mean, the Mirror front page says you are in the war, and that feels frightening. You meaning the UK, right? You meaning directed at us, yeah. So I think... the Russian president has always had a particular disdain for the UK, and that is largely because we have always been, even within Europe, a lot tougher when it comes to Russia. And so I think he's consistently always singled us out for criticism as far as he's concerned. I think the only thing that I could say that was offering reassurance, because, yes, I agree, it is frightening, is that we are a NATO country. We still have those rules, and he has also called out Poland for building a base near the border, and that is also a NATO country. So it would be very stupid... President Trump coming in, though. He's no fan of NATO. But Trump is interesting because everybody expected him to be very difficult about Ukraine, but he's also quite erratic in his decision-making, which is not great. You know, there's no consistency there, but it means that all hope is not lost when it comes to that. And if he has come in and he is going to find some kind of negotiated peace or negotiated settlement, then I am for that. It's just that it cannot be all on Russia's terms. I mean, in some ways, this rhetoric is just the sort of thing you'd expect from Putin. I mean, let's remember, China and Iran are supplying the Russians with weapons. Are we turning around and saying that China and Iran are in this war against Ukraine? And then they've got troops, the Russians have got troops from North Korea that are working with them. I think this sort of rhetoric is to be expected without taking away from what Salma said, what you've said, Kate, about, and also obviously what the front pages are saying. This is serious. This is serious, and
you know, he is a, I don't know if this is a hate crime, he's a Russian bear who's feeling wounded because he thought he could walk into Ukraine and it would be over within days, and that hasn't happened. And whilst, you know, it is a terrible conflict that's ongoing, he has lost, you know, a lot of, you know, face in terms of what he was saying at the start of this conflict, which is what, it's been going on, what, 2.5, 3 years nearly now.
But for those that, in terms of sort of managing the way things look, and, I mean, we know the reality, don't we, very clearly, but the fact that those weapons, British weapons, were fired into Russia feels like it justifies his version of events, which is it's Russia against the world. Well, certainly
but we can't give in to that, because there are certain things. Look, people talk about...
We can't give in to it, but people watching might feel frightened by it, particularly with the shrinking of defences and the changing of our sort of defence strategy, that people might be thinking, well, hang on, where's this going?
But we have had, as a result, and this is another loss for Putin as well, we've had 2 countries who weren't in NATO who have joined NATO. So, if anything, actually, our, NATO and our alliances in the West and with America have become more consolidated and strengthened. I mean, you know, Trump actually criticised NATO because not enough of the members were paying their fair share. And actually, we've seen an uptick in those countries saying, yeah, we've got to pay more into this. So, actually, the alliance is stronger. He hasn't weakened the alliance in the West.
Can we just talk about the other big conflict as well, which is obviously Gaza, Israel, and an extraordinary development yesterday that the International Criminal Court has said that it does want to issue these arrest warrants, has issued these arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu, also his former Defence Secretary, Yoav Gallant, and, we should say, the leader of Hamas, if he indeed is still alive. Is anything actually going to happen, though? Because this seems like a really difficult situation. If Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the UK, is he honestly going to be arrested by British police, do we think?
Well, we actually don't know what the decision of the ratification of the UK courts on this is. So, you know, it would create all manner of tension, I think, if we were going to arrest a democratically elected leader, despite the fact that he might be unpopular where he is. So I think this is going to be a very difficult diplomatic decision, although I think the Prime Minister has said that we are going to comply with any order as long as it goes through the process.
Number 10 statement says just that.
So we signed up to the International Criminal Court. It hasn't been reversed by a Conservative government, so I presume that there is a cross-party support of that. And technically, what Salma says is 100% right. If Netanyahu and this Hamas leader as well were to enter into the UK, then part of signing up would be to arrest. It is a bit of a diplomatic nightmare. I don't think there is necessarily equivalence between Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation, and Israel, which is a democratic country. However, you know, we've signed up to this treaty, and with due respect, you have to honour that.
And it is, sorry, I just wanted to explain that it is up to police in each country to actually do the arresting, right? Because people might be a bit confused by this. Because the ICC can issue the arrest warrant, but it does have to be, they don't have police. They don't go around the world
basically limits
arresting
the travel of these people around the world.
And it's not long since he came here, Netanyahu. I think 2023 he came to see Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, that was the last time, and has been
happen.
A frequent visitor. Not since this conflict, of course, because I'm sure he's focusing on what's going on at home for him, but it could well happen. And I suppose for people that perhaps don't know, the ICC is essentially what came out of what we would think of as The Hague and the trials that carried on after World War II, and became a way of the world recognising whatever country you're from, whatever your allegiance to, there should be standards across the world for behaviour. And it does mean, and we know that Keir Starmer is very hot on international law, and it's believed passionately it should be held to account, of course, as is right. It does put him in a tricky situation, doesn't it? Both there and at home.
As I said, it could be a diplomatic nightmare.
And what about when he goes there to speak? You know, the idea that he would then be shaking hands with Netanyahu, the ICC have said, is accused of a war crime.
Whether Netanyahu comes to this country or we go there, it presents its challenges. But again, this was something that some countries joined. We were one of them, partly to do with restricting the movement of people around the world who've committed either offences, human rights offences, in terms of conflict, genocide and so on. And some countries, like Israel, like America, like Russia, like China and some African countries haven't joined it. Qatar's not a member of it either. No. So it is one of those agreements. And as I said, its main thing in terms of issuing this for the members who've signed up to it is to restrict the movement of people. And I think there were 3 Hamas leaders that were cited. 2 of them are already dead. And I think, I understand, that Israel is claiming it may have already killed, or the third person on the list is dead as well. So actually, at the moment, in terms of the names, it is Netanyahu and another Israeli politician.
I just want to talk about one other domestic issue as well, which is assisted dying, because it's a week to go until Parliament votes next Friday, 29th of November. And there's been so much focus on this the past few weeks. I think the Labour government perhaps regrets giving that commitment. It was.
Well,
Keir
you were
Starmer,
there,
wasn't
it? Weren't you? It was your interview in March.
Yeah,
we had. Explain to people to remind them. Yeah.
In March, we interviewed Keir Starmer and we had Dame Esther Ranson on speakerphone, and he promised her that he would allow time for a vote in Parliament. And I just wonder, Caroline, whether maybe he might be regretting that now, because it's sort of becoming this divisive issue within government. And we all respect the arguments around it, but Wes Streeting went hard, didn't he? The Health Secretary saying he would oppose it. That's had a lot of pushback from other people. I just wonder whether Keir Starmer's thinking, actually, I could do without this.
I hope not, actually, because I think, you know, this is important to... Whatever the outcome of next Friday's vote, I think it's just really important to discuss these issues. And clearly there is, you know, really, you know, sincere views, not just in Parliament on all sides of this debate, but in the wider public. What I am concerned about is some of the voices who are saying, oh, this is a private member's bill, we're not going to have enough time to do it, and all of that.
I mean, those voices are father and mother of the House, Edward Lee and Diane Abbott.
Well,
I mean, isn't that the point of them being there in some ways, to understand process and advise newer MPs on it?
Yes, but what can also happen in terms of a private member's bill is that the government with Parliament as well can also work out more time to look at this. And we've done that before on other issues, on abortion, on other issues of when people come to their conscience about what they feel about
Thank goodness we did. And actually, the former clerk of the House of Commons, which, you know, I appreciate is a bit of a technical job, but, you know, he knows the ins and outs of Parliament, and he said yesterday to MPs, there's no need to worry about a private member's bill. You'll have just as much time to debate it as a government bill.
It is a bit of a myth being put about.
No, that's not true, because you get a private member's bill and you might have the time to debate it. The issue around it is the use of a private member's bill, which is supposed to be for small changes according to the sort of technical understanding of legislation, and that there is no clear impact assessment of it. So if you have a government department...
But abortion wasn't a small change. Decriminalising homosexuality wasn't a small change. Getting rid of capital punishment, that wasn't a small change.
But we are talking about a legislative process that has evolved and grown, and understanding the impact, especially when it comes with it. Now, if you have a private member's bill and government departments are willing to provide that information and provide impact assessments on it, and, you know, the Health Secretary has looked at costings of his own department to aid his argument in some respects, I think it's important that that level of information is available.
Of course, but that's a choice the government can make, and that's where it comes back to your point about what will Keir Starmer do after the vote next week. There is absolutely, and the clerk is right, I was in Parliament for 22 years, the clerk is right that actually you can make time. And we have discussed things as capital punishment, abortion, you know, gay rights, you know, not insignificant, complicated issues with very strong views, and private members' bills was a spur to open up that debate because governments were too worried about doing it on their own.
And no government's ever going to bring forward an assisted dying bill, let's be frank.
No,
but it's just not going to happen.
No,
but why not? But why not? So we have to ask ourselves, do we want to use these things because we don't have the moral courage to do it when we're in government, and we pass it through a private member's bill?
All right.